about it. And we are represented in the committee by Councilman Hendricks, and in the council and McLean and President O'Connell. And Mr. Hanlon, will you please read Bill 37?
Bill 37 amends the 2017 general fund budget by appropriating funds from the unappropriated balance of the general fund in the amount of $225,000 for property tax refunds.
Thank you, and we have our illustrious Director of Finance, Mr. Hartzell.
Oh, now we're up to illustrious. This is getting dangerous.
We thought you was sick, but she's here. So thank you for coming over. And the illustrious Hartzell is just about to tell us it's all about.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm going to give you all a little background on what has resulted in Bill 37 being brought before you. You may recall we spend a significant amount of money every year, which is not a surprise, whether it be in refunding real estate tax or business privilege tax or solid waste fees that were found to have been collected in error, and we are very quick about getting those refunds out to people. But we normally expect that there's a certain amount from year to year that we're going to be refunding for those purposes. Last July, something happened that was going to make this year's refund draw a lot different from those of previous years. And that was as part of the legislation that decoupled, state legislation that decoupled the city from ANISDA. There was also a provision therein that required all property within the NIS to be calculated on a, I believe it's called a revenue basis, but something that would appear to have been different from a cost basis, which whether Lehigh County had been doing it on one basis or the other, there was this specific direction given that properties within the NIS were to be calculated on the revenue generated basis, and there was a little proviso thrown in there that any revenue received from tax subsidies for those particular properties was not to be included in your calculation of revenue. So the likelihood was that there were going to be quite a few properties that were going to be asking for tax reductions as a result of it, and they, for the most part, we are aware of those that have within the NIS so far. After those particular reappraisals were done and the county signed off on them, the annual hit to the city as a result of that adjustment alone will be a little bit more than $100,000 annually downward. What complicates this a bit more is that many of the assessed valuations that were coming under question had been for buildings that were in the midst of their development stages in the previous 3 years. And when that happens, you get what's called an interim assessment. And when you have an interim assessment, as I understand it from the staff, adjustments that happen to the final value can actually be made to the interim values of previous years also. And so, at this point of the year, in a year where we would normally be expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000 to go out in refunds, we are at a point now in terms of those that have already gone out the door and those that we are now having to refund on the latest change list for the city, or a change list from the county for real estate values of $402,000 so far this year, of which $322,000 just happens to be connected to the reassessed values within the NIS. And a lot of that is a one-time hit, but when you're having to refund 16 and 15 and 14 taxes that were ostensibly overcharged, and you have to pay it all back at once, that has a consequence to it. So, Bill 37, to put it simply, is to deal with this anomaly of an unusual run on our refund account and to replenish it to the extent we believe necessary for the remainder of the year. We will draw, our request is to draw upon the unappropriated cash balance of the general fund to another $225,000 to accomplish this purpose, as we are not in a position yet to try to know whether we can pull back on other operations in the city at this stage of the year. And even though the one person who asked about it, I don't believe is here tonight, it is my intention on a related issue. Once the CAFR is completed in June and we have essentially a reserve for the general fund that is determined on the accrual method after that, we will, starting in July, begin putting those balances within the ordinances that refer to these drawdowns, and that you will then be able to compare apples to apples at that point. But I'm not throwing a number out there until the CAFR is complete. And that pretty much is the overall sense of the bill.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions, and then I will ask my colleagues if they have any questions. So essentially this bill is only has to do with the NIST properties, and nobody else in the city has any reassessment issues with this bill that may have been taxed wrongly and may need some refund, or it's only properties within the NIST because they appeal.
To be clear on that, Mr. Greedy, no, this is what we would normally expect in the course of the year. This affects everybody in the entire city, and we send refunds out that the revenue and audit staff approve regularly, and that I will sign off on so we can cut the checks. And whether it be a solid waste fee or a business privilege tax or a real estate tax refund, we're equal opportunity in that regard. If we see that anybody in the city has been wrongly assessed, we will refund the money to the extent that to correct that. It's just that there is a certain usual pace of where those refunds go in the course of a year based upon that type of assessment activity that has been thrown out of whack this year, I would argue, because primarily of the one rather sizable adjustment involving NIS property, since that currently takes up more on its own than what we had budgeted for the entire year for general fund refunds.
So the NIS property has been 72,000. Is another
300,000.
Was only 2,000?
All of the NIS properties that have gone into these valuations have had their assessment values reduced to an extent, and will turn probably more in terms of the improvements. I don't know that the land value is going to change that much.
So it's 77,000.
And the overall impact right now with all of those reductions is that we're looking at an annualized impact to real estate tax that's going to be over $100,000 annually. But the refund that we have to come up with immediately is much greater than that, for the reason that interim valuations on those properties were also shifted downward in the 3 previous years. And we have to refund extra tax collected in 2016, 2015, and 2014 for those purposes. And that is entirely related to those properties. So out of 402,000 that we have refunded so far in this space, 322,000 of it is tied to the properties that are within the zone.
Wow. 300, how much you said?
322,000 so far that is either already paid out or is, we're writing the checks now to get it paid out. And that covers 4 years of tax assessments.
Now, outside of the NIS property, how do people know that they were reassessed the wrong way? They look property, you send them a letter, or do they just go to get a check, or how does that work?
It is at this point that I will turn the microphone over to Tricia Dickert and or Seth O'Neill, who can explain that process in appropriate detail.
Okay, just Tricia Dickert and Seth O'Neill.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good evening.
All right.
So every month, best way I can explain it to you is the county is the keeper of deeded information. So whenever a change to an assessment takes place, once a month, the county sends a report over to the city, specifically our office, and that report will capture both sides of the spectrum. So it will capture any properties where an increase in the assessment has happened, by which our office will either send a corrected bill. In some cases, if their real estate tax bill's already been paid, we'll issue an interim bill. But the flip side of that is any assessments that have gone down. So in the event the county sends over a change report, we go through every item on that report. And again, if the assessment went up, we send a bill. If the assessment goes down, we automatically complete the paperwork for the taxpayer to refund that money to them without them having to jump through any additional hoops to get the money back. So in most cases, if the taxpayer's assessment is going down, it's for a reason. They probably appealed it, maybe they had a building raised, perhaps they deconverted it, any number of things could happen, but the county's the keeper of the assessment. So basically, if the county tells us that the assessment is going down and we notice that the taxpayer already made the payment, without putting the taxpayer through any additional paperwork, we proactively just complete that paperwork and send the money back. That's the normal course of real estate tax refunds. We can get into the refunds that happen at the end of the year. It's kind of a little bit different. In that case, we're actually sending letters to taxpayers who have an overpayment on their account, giving them an opportunity to reach out to us, provide us with the paperwork, and then we'll refund the money to them. But the way county change reports are handled is just a little bit different in that we don't really require the taxpayer to jump through those extra hoops. If the assessment is lowered as a result of the county and we know they paid too much, proactively, we just send that money back to them.
That is 100% accurate to the best of my knowledge.
I'd like to give the opportunity to my colleagues. Other comments, questions?
Thank you, Mr. Green. Just a couple, and I'll state the obvious. I assume that the county and both the school district are also held to this reassessment, and they likewise will have to be making refunds.
Mr. Hendricks, yes, and in the case of the school district, which has a much higher millage rate than the city does, it will be that much more painful.
And my other question would be, do we anticipate any other structures or land or anything of any significant value that would also perhaps be reassessed?
There's always the risk for that. The ones that I have seen so far, I believe, cover the ones that we were expecting to see. And we've just gotten the last shifts in those in the last month. So I don't know that there are any other big numbers that could yet happen. The ones that we've expected to see, we now know of. And that's part of where that $322,000 repayment comes from.
Okay, so the likelihood is probably slim and none unless there's some lesser properties or something that someone's privately. Okay, thank you.
Any comments, anybody else, Ms. Fulton, Mr. McLean, Mr. O'Connell? So, any comments from the public?
I do one more. Did the city county school district, did they think of appealing this? I think the school district, they appealed it.
I don't know the answer to that one, and I'd probably defer to Susan Wild on whether that will be done. I guess it would all depend upon it, and if the school district decided to do it, they would have done it on their own at this point. I don't believe the city has engaged in that at all.
I think the school district did find it. We got a lawyer from up north.
Yeah.
When can I ask a question?
Actually, he was developers appeal, right?
We had also factored in coming up with our estimates for real estate tax to be collected in 2017, the risk that we were going to lose the recurring amount, a little over $100,000 as part of our estimates. But I think the total refund that we're paying back ended up being a bit higher than what we were originally anticipating.
Oh, can I continue to talk, Mr. Brady? So if, they're gonna, the news property is 222,000 back, didn't we have an agreement that, you know, they would beautify the area a little bit? Or was that just with the parking lot?
That was in the part of that.
Parking lot, yeah, you know, benches and, you know, nice landscapes and things like that, so. It's interesting.
You know, I think the developer is in question, whether he is, he has been doing some beautification himself, especially the arts district. But, and I think there's more coming.
Yeah, he's been generous. I know, Mr. Hendricks is working on something on the side that hopefully we can announce that soon.
Yes.
With Mr. Hendricks and yeah, it's, hey, fair game, anybody could appeal their assessment and, you know, the Board of Assessments agree, and so it is what it is.
All right, if not, no comments from the public, anybody? If not, I would, thank you, and, we'll call this meeting, I'm sorry, we gotta move this forward, do something with it.
I'll make a motion that this be moved forward to the full council with favorable recommendation.
Okay,
Second.
Second, all in favor, please respond and say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Now we can, call the meeting to, adjournment. Thank you.